If there's anything that people take out of this webinar, it's that insurance is done together. It's done when the retailer and the wholesaler and the underwriter all work collaboratively as partners to achieve a final result that is good for everybody.
I don't know why you would want to just waste your time going to sit through a designation course just to pass a test, just to get a designation. I'd rather have no designations and have the knowledge than have designations and nothing.
And the great part about professional is, you get to learn something new every day. You get to try to do your best to serve the businesses that come to you in a way that will protect them when they need it. And it's never a dull moment.
When COVID came, all that stuff changed, man. It's not difficult to get the education you need, and it's also not expensive. It just requires a little bit of commitment to start it and then the effort to see it through to completions.
With our agents is explain the renewal in terms of math so that the retailer can explain it to their clients.
If you don't have good relationships with your carriers, your underwriters, your wholesalers, you might as well forget it because you need them in order to handle the needs of the clients and prospects. If you don't have those relationships, you don't have a business. I just figured out a long time ago that if I can make my submission as complete as it possibly can be and give the underwriter the entire story, good, bad, or otherwise, in many cases, it's going to be the difference between whether or not I even get a quote. Then once I do get a quote, we can start talking about, is the pricing going to be the best or not?
If you're going to get into professional liability, there are a lot of people that hold themselves out as experts. But the way to differentiate yourself in professional liability is to actually be an expert.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And my guest today is Mr. Andrew Kelly from AJ Wayne and Associates, who is a wholesaler who specializes in all forms of professional liability. And I think that we have a lot we can talk about today because as business continues to evolve, more and more businesses that didn't have a professional exposure in the past are starting to. So I'm interested in hearing what Drew's seeing in the marketplace and learning more about his company and what they do, and then letting y'all join me for that conversation. So before we get too far down the road, Drew, why don't you give everybody the background as to how you got to where you're at with AJ Wayne today?
It's an interesting story. First of all, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate the opportunity. I started with AJ Wayne and Associates 21 years ago, almost to the month now. It was
Wow.
the only job interview I've ever done, and I specifically remember at the time we have a history of hiring DePaul students, and at the time I was just looking for my first job, and there was a posting on the DePaul website, and I called it, and the owner picked up, and he's like, "Why don't you come in for an interview today?" I had to tell him that point because I was not prepared to do an impromptu call with the owner that I'd be happy to, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I don't have a suit. If I come in, it's going to be in my DePaul pullover, and he invited me in. We did a 10-minute interview, and I'll never forget. They offered me the job on the spot, and that's where I've been ever since.
Holy cow, man. So what the heck did you say to him in the interview to get it locked down that quick?
At the time, they were looking for an admin person. And, when they brought me in, I didn't know anything about insurance. And I know that I was looking for, a position to sort of get me through to part of my job search because I wanted to be a professor at the time. But it wasn't long that through the interview process that I realized that they had an interesting company. They were in a niche that interested me, and I asked them during the interview process that, hey, if you're looking for an admin person, would you mind if I did a 50-50 sort of a deal and also work towards my broker license? And I think, having somebody that was interested in both maybe caught their attention, and the rest is history.
So I got to know, man. I feel like there's a lot of people who enter the industry as a producer with no real insurance knowledge.
Yeah.
What's it like to enter the industry as a wholesaler with no real knowledge at that point? And the reason I asked the question is because I feel like when I first started out, I was relying on guys like you to get my answers. That's kind of scary to think that maybe there's people out there that are coming in and getting opportunities like that. Obviously, it's worked out well for you 21 years later, right? But I mean, I think it's interesting that you were even given a chance to be in a role like that. Obviously, admin is admin, but taking the initiative and wanting to work towards your broker's license and learn is certainly a huge feather in your cap, but probably a little scary for you too.
Well, I wasn't a broker immediately. At the time, what I did for at least, I would say, 5 or 6 months was Alex Wayne, who was our owner. He would do quotes. And back in those days, we used to re-represent the quotes. And
Mm.
what he would do is he would give me a market's quote. I would have to re-represent it. I would have to explain it to him. And then he would correct my errors. And this went on for months before I even handled my first submission. So working with AJ Wayne and working with Alex in particular, I always like to tell people it's kind of like going through, military training to a certain degree. They drill you over and over and over again. And I was lucky to have a guy behind me. His name was Dave. Whenever I had a question, he was there to sort of guide me through it. And we were a team. And having those people behind you in the early days really made the difference between not knowing anything at all what I was doing, just sort of learning little by little. Before I actually became a broker, I did all the surplus line filings and all the renewals of the licenses in our states. And I kind of had to pay my dues before I really got into it. And that was part of the blessing of getting started with that company, that I had the support. They had the time to sort of teach me, and they were willing to take me through every step of the way so that when I started brokering full force, they just didn't sort of throw me to the wolves, which I'm grateful for.
So what was it about professional liability specifically that interested you?
You know, it was the first company I contacted, but when I got into it, what I liked about professional versus some of the other stuff that I saw versus the GL versus the workers comp was that professional really does strike at the heart of what the business does. And it is never the same thing twice. One day you could be working on a design build firm on the East Coast. The next day you could be working on a consultant in Louisiana. The next day you're working on a cyber firm, somebody's cyber exposure, making sure that they have the coverage they need. And the great part about professional is, you get to learn something new every day. You get to try to do your best to serve the businesses that come to you in a way that will protect them when they need it. And it's never a dull moment.
That's a fact. I mean, I don't, it's not a dull moment in any of the stuff that we do because it's always a different business anyhow. But I'm interested, the professional piece is one I think that so many things have morphed, man. Like it used to kind of be there wasn't as much gray area, and maybe it's because we just didn't think through things enough to realize there really was gray area. But it feels like there's so many types of risks now where the bodily injury and property damage could be on the general liability, but it also might have something to do with a professional exposure. And I think it really challenges you as a producer to have to think through what you're asking for from underwriting, at the beginning, the onset of the entire process. But it also, I mean, I'm sure it's keeping you on your toes too. And you're in kind of a unique situation. I'm interested in your thoughts on this, but you know, you can't you can't go out and just advise producers on you need to be asking this, and this, because now all of a sudden you're entering yourself into the equation of how they're covering their client, and they can have selective amnesia as many producers do and point the finger at somebody else. But um I'm interested in how do you navigate that? You know, what are you seeing now that's different in the professional space? Similar, I mean, I gave you an example that I came up with on the fly, but I mean, how do you navigate that as a wholesaler? Let's say something comes in. I'll give you a good example of something from my book of business. I've got a company that I work with that is pretty good size. They do online pre-employment screening, background checks, MVRs, and all of that stuff. And when I went in and started working with them, one of the things that I noticed was that on the professional, they had a just completely excluded bodily injury and property damage on the professional side. Yet they're running background checks on people who could be placed in a company, and if they didn't do their job, end up, they could be felons that got out or whatever else. And so I asked the wholesale underwriter. He's like, "Well, I'm sure that they'll take this off, but they're going to charge you for it. And if not, I know another market that'll do it." So that led me to believe, okay, I'm on the right path, right? I mean, obviously, if they don't do their job and somebody gets placed into an account and they do bodily injury or property damage, the current form's not going to cover them because it's a professional issue that caused that to happen. Whereas many times we're looking at financial triggers to be what kicks off the professional liability policy. So when you're working with a producer and you get things that come in like that with all of the changes that happen, and you start throwing cyber and a bunch of this other stuff in there too, there's also bleed over there depending on what the industry is. How do you guide that producer without getting yourself in trouble?
Well, it's a process. And every time I get a submission, you kind of have to walk the line of not getting in the way, but also giving advice. So when I get a new submission, when our office gets a new submission, the first thing we'll do is review the website because it all starts there. If you want to find something that's not mentioned on the application, if you want to find something in terms of their methodology of the services they're offering, you can find a lot on their website. So after that, I can't count. It's usually 6 or 7 out of 10 times. I will obviously give the producer a market list, but then I'll make a mention of the things that I found and say, I'm going to mention this to the markets, but I'm seeing this in the services side. I'm seeing this exposure on the tech side. Maybe there's a cyber exposure that lends itself to a tech E&O exposure based upon a piece of customized software or hardware that they have. So I'm making notes to the retailer so that while I'm giving them a market list, I'm always also starting to give them a roadmap about the different exposures I see, the different questions that might come up, so that they're prepared. So that if a market asks maybe 2 or 3 of those questions and 2 or 3 of those questions their own, they're not surprised. So that we can proceed to the quoting part of it with a little bit more certainty, and we don't have to start from square one. And then that kind of moves into the quoting phase of it, where my process is once we've identified the key pivot points, I like to call them, I address the pivot points in every quote in a way that the retailer can see it, both in terms of the page number and in terms of how each market addresses them, so that you can start to perform opinions based upon, okay, well, if they're looking for the best coverage, X market is the best because it addresses the pivot points in the most efficient way. And if they're looking for some like a hybrid, option that provides maybe a combination of coverage of both price and efficiency, it maybe should be company wide, because while they might have, a provision or two that I'm not as excited about, they're a good hybrid option. And then, there are inevitably underwriters that, provide a good option in terms of price, but there are several exclusions that I'll have to explain that these are issues to me. If it were me, I might not go here. But if you do sell this option, you definitely need to mention these exclusion, and here's why. And where we try to like to leave it at the end is the producer has an understanding, and they're put first in terms of an advisory capacity, so they can advise their insureds as best they see fit.
So if I'm a new producer, and we talk about this a lot, there's a decent amount of new talent that comes into the industry on the sales side, and I feel like they're in, they flounder, they're out relatively quickly because the industry by and large doesn't have a huge support structure for them at the agency level for whatever the reason. I don't think there is a valid reason other than agency principals are cheap and they don't invest in their people the way they should, but I'm entitled to that opinion. But that being said, I do think that if you can understand professional liability and get into some of the industries where professional is prevalent, you could really differentiate yourself and build up some unique knowledge over your competition if you're willing to go down that rabbit hole and invest in it. If you were a producer coming into the industry new today, where do you see opportunity on the professional liability side that would be a great place for them to plug in and be off to the races?
Well, in my mind, it's interesting that you asked that question because I just came back from the Indiana convention, and the best part of the convention is always there's some students at Ball State that are in the risk management, side of the university, and they're just coming into it, and you like to ask them the question about, where do you see yourself? What part of insurance do you want to get into? And hearing their answers is always really interesting. But they asked me the same question you asked me, and it's funny. The first time I saw you was a part. It was a advertisement you did where you were like in a car and you were talking about designations, and that stuck with me. And that's kind of how I was introduced to you. And that's the answer that I give them. I tell them that if you're going to get into professional liability, there are a lot of people that hold themselves out as experts. But the way to differentiate yourself in professional liability is to actually be an expert. Like get into certifications, do the RPLU, all of our brokers have it, do the CPCU, learn about the surplus lines with the ASLI, learn about D&O with the exec PLP and the MLIS, like learn about claims with the AIC and what sets apart the claim handling process in terms of domicile and how you take the part of the policy itself, which is contract law, which is the offer and acceptance and the contract. If you can differentiate yourself with designations and you learn about insurance and then you funnel your experience through those designations and learn about the industry in a way that makes you consultative, then it makes the whole process easy because you're not selling something. You're trying to help other people with the information and the knowledge that you have.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot to discuss there, honestly, but education's the biggest piece, man. And I think if I were advising a new producer on the fastest way for them to grow their book, it would be to learn whatever it is you're going to specialize in to the point that you can teach it to other people and that they'll understand it, regardless of what it is. It doesn't matter if you could be an auto specialist, you could be professional liability, you could even be micro down into professional liability, be very specific industry and role in that industry. But I think where we have the disconnect in writing new business is that we feel so much that we have to sell it when the reality is if you just educate, it sells itself. There isn't really in my opinion anyhow, a hard sales process in the insurance industry. Is prospecting difficult? It absolutely is. That's what's grueling is going out, knocking on doors, dialing for dollars, any of the things that you need to do to get the opportunity to have that sales conversation. But when you actually do have the sales conversation, I feel like those people that are set up to be the educators are the ones that are going to do the absolute best. And, they'll close more business and they'll have good retention because their clients love the fact that they are learning and getting good information from these people. Funny enough, you mentioned carpool closer because that's the whole reason that existed, right? My son came into the industry and we were talking back and forth about how he was going to learn different things, but also how do we have time to consistently create content. And it's like, well, we got 5 minutes on the way to and from the office every day. We can record you asking me questions and me answering them in a minute for a minute. And you know what? I get more people that reach out to me over that, I think, than any other kind of content that I put out. But the cool part about it is nobody really even understands the end game there. They unless they've heard me speak publicly, they don't even know why I did that. And so the first part of it was for him to ask me questions. The second half, which we're in the process of filming now, is me flipping the script. I ask the questions and he answers them so that he can show that he's starting to learn and understand. And then take it a step further. When we get done, when I determine we're done, we're going to take all of those 1 minute videos. I'm actually in the process of doing this right now. We worked on it a little bit yesterday, transcribing them and then adding on to the answer to the question. And when we have 365 of them, we're making a daily sales reader for insurance producers where they can go in every day, read a question, get the answer, and put it up, and then go on to the next one. So if nothing else, hopefully we can help form the habit of reading every day, which is, really good for people to do. But education's crucial, man. And I think we get so caught up in trying to sell the deal because that's what gets us paid, that it makes it difficult to focus on educating, and makes it even more difficult for that education to appear to be authentic, as opposed to, this guy's just telling me what I want to hear to get a deal done. So that's good advice, man. I think, there's certainly plenty of designations to choose from too. There are designations that are really good that it doesn't make any sense for me to have. I don't need to go get the transportation risk specialist designation unless I'm going to specialize in that. It would be information worth knowing if I ever had a trucking account come across my desk, but I have enough friends that have that designation. I'll just pick up the phone and call them, just like they would do the same if it's something workers' comp related, and I carry the CWCA and the CRM that help me with that stuff. But I do encourage producers to go do that. And it's interesting. I don't know enough about the institutes because I haven't gone into their ecosystem to look yet. I've always been part of the National Alliance, or it's been rebranded something now. But when COVID came, all that stuff changed, man. It's not difficult to get the education you need, and it's also not expensive. It just requires a little bit of commitment to start it and then the effort to see it through to completion. So again, I'm going to beat the dead horse one last time, but it goes back to, this is exactly what I did when I got in the industry. I didn't have any experience. I got my license, and I'm like, they told me to brainwash myself everything I learned in pre-licensing because it's not real world. Where do I learn real world? And that's back before you could do this stuff online. I drove all over the southeastern part of the US trying to get to the different CIC modules for a long weekend as quickly as I could, so that I could drink from a fire hose and learn as much of that information as I possibly could and give me a fighting chance out on the streets. And guess what? It worked. It did. It gave me things to think about. It gave me questions to ask. But that stuff's only as good as your ability to maintain it is. And, again, one of my big beefs with the industry is continuing education. I see way too many people that are just looking for the quickest way to get their continuing ed done online so they can check a box and say they were done and keep their license. When the reality is, man, we owe it to our clients, we owe it to our families, and we owe it to ourselves to actually take that seriously and make ourselves better as a result of it. And, I don't always go to continuing ed to get the credit. And I know that the air just left the room from people listening. But what I mean by that is, I feel like I have an ethical obligation to only get credit when I actually participate to get credit. I learn a lot through osmosis too. So when the National Alliance came out and they gave you the ability to buy an annual subscription for $700 and take as many classes as you want, there are plenty of afternoons that I'll be sitting at my desk with a ruble playing on my iPad so I can hear it, but I'm not checking in on the attendance button because I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I've paid 100% attention the entire time for whatever the hours are, when all I really wanted to do is get exposed to that information and hear what they have to say. But there's plenty of times where I'll be listening to one of these continuing ed things in the background while I'm sitting at my computer working, and just even feeding that into my head that way helps me stay on top of a lot of stuff. But I'll tell you what, man, if you think you're good, go in and listen to some of these like instructors that have been around for a while. Really start drilling down. I remember I went through a graduate seminar for my CIC one time. It was either 4 or 8 hours of nothing but additional insured endorsements. Like the entire
Mhm.
thing was all AI endorsements. And I came out of that thing with my head hurting, but thinking to myself, there's no way everybody on the streets knows this stuff. There's no way other agents are investing and sitting in that room to hear that. So I need to pay extra close attention here because this is where I'm going to be able to differentiate myself in the marketplace.
100%. I met a younger producer last night at Plus, and he was asking me how I went about some of the designations that I had, and I always said it's not about how fast you can pass it. It's about how much gets into your mind that you can have as a part of you to teach other people. So my suggestion was take a half hour in the morning, think about the information, try to internalize it, and take a half hour in the evening and do the same thing so that, when you're done with your hour a day, the information that you've learned will be more internalizing. The big mistake, I think, some of the, like the institutes or plus is like, as soon as you, apply for the class, they very much encourage you to immediately schedule the test. And I think that's the wrong way to go because it puts you on a deadline to, learn the information as fast as possible. Sometimes there's procrastination and you're cramming at the very end. And my advice to people is that, do your hour a day, do the practice tests at the end, and schedule the test when you feel you're ready. So that way, when you're scheduling the test is not the issue. You've already mastered the information, you're ready to schedule the test, and you're not just going through the information for the information's sake. Because if you're just gonna fly through these designations and not learn anything, what's the point? You want to internalize the information. You want to have the information ready if somebody needs it, and you want to make it count.
Yeah, I take it one step further, man. I challenge anybody on my team that's going to go through and get their designation to write a blog post on each one of the learning objectives because it kills two birds
Yeah.
with one stone, too, right? Those are
Yep.
questions a lot of times that people are going to ask. And if you have it on your website and they go to Google, they're going to get the answer. And if you know it well enough to write a short, a blog post on it, you're going to commit it to memory pretty quickly. So, again, it's a matter of if you're going to go through it, do it right. Like don't just pencil whip it. Don't do it half-heartedly. Take it serious. And for no other reason, again, I don't know if this statistic is accurate or not. This is the statistic that I was given when I first got in the industry, but back then they said that the average person with a CIC designation makes 30% more a year than somebody who doesn't have it as a producer. I don't know if it's accurate or not. I can tell you that I know enough information that has allowed me to get further into conversations with people as a result of having it. And that's certainly turned into dollars. But if you don't do it because it's the right thing to do it because you can make more money. Like I don't know why you would want to just waste your time going to sit through a designation course just to pass a test, just to get a designation. I'd rather have no designations and have the knowledge than have designations and nothing.
Right. 100%. I think if you commit the time to it and you make it part of a mindset that you're learning this information to help your clients and to help your insureds or your agents or whatever the case may be, that mindset turns into a consultative approach. And that approach is going to make you successful.
So, what are you seeing in the marketplace right now? We're in the hardest market most of us have ever seen. I mean, in the 20 years I've been in the industry in Florida, it's usually I could just say, no, it's just another Wednesday in Florida. No, this is actually a much different animal because it's not limited to one line of coverage. We're getting hammered on property, we're getting hammered on GL, we're getting hammered on auto, we're getting hammered on umbrella. Cyber's a little bit softer, workers' comp is softer, but I mean, I don't know what it's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the course of the next couple of years. But on the wholesale side, I think that the chair you sit in is one that is not understood as well as it needs to be by the
Mhm.
retail agents that are out there producing business and submitting it to you. And I mean that, I want to clarify that, and then I'll have you offer your comment. Number one, if an agent really understood what your job was, you would never have to go back and ask for information a second time. You would get the submission completed the first time every single time. Now,
Right.
I've interacted with you enough on LinkedIn that I know you're very, very detail oriented because I've seen how you answer questions, I've seen the information you look for, and I would double, triple, quadruple check a submission I was sending to you because I would be challenging you to try and find something. Okay. But I also know what the average submission looks like across all of my wholesale friends that I talk to.
Mhm.
And I don't even know how anybody could expect you to try and go get numbers with some of the nonsense that I see turned in. So, number one, I think in the hard market agents, you really need to understand what a full and complete submission means and looks like, and then commit to giving that to your partners. But the other thing that I think that we fail to recognize is we're scrambling to do reshops. And at any given month, I don't know what the average producer would have. A dozen's probably too much, depending on the size of the account. But let's say they're scrambling for a dozen reshops every single month, and they get
Mhm.
frustrated because they're not getting terms back in enough time. Somehow they miss the point that if they have a dozen,
Mhm.
you have all the agents that you work with that have that dozen, and you're
Mhm.
trying to shuffle all of this around. And it goes back to the complete submission piece. If you don't have the information you need, that submission can't stay at the top of the stack. You've got a whole stack you have to get through. You know, what are you seeing from producers? Is it getting any better? Are the quality of submissions any better? Are the quality of the risks any better? And what advice would you give them as they're trying to navigate the marketplace right now to get the attention of their wholesale partners, and specifically yours if they send something to you?
Well, I think it's a dual pronged answer. The first part is, when a retail agent sends me something, you always like to see a complete submission, but like to go into it cognizant that you are being accessed as an expert and relied upon by a retail agent because they're coming to you for that value add. So I just recently had a cyber submission sent to me, and they're looking for access social engineering. And you're reviewing the application, and I take snippets of it as we're going along, and I say, I can definitely take this out for access social engineering right now. But the problem is, if you take a look at the application, you're going to notice, take a look, they answer the MFA no. They don't do a multi-factor authentication. Take a look at the EDR, they answer no. Like, take a look at their backup questions, they answer no. And my question to him was, and I called him afterwards and we discussed it, was that, you know, before you do this, take a look at the primary, take a look at the application, make sure these answers are right, because I can take this out now, but the answers we may get are going to, not be something you like. And that's part of it, is the consultating on the application that you get on the front end. On the back end, in terms of where the market is, soft, hard, on the professional side, I always like to say I've been in this market in insurance for 21 years. It's been soft, maybe 20 and a half. There's a lot of capacity. A lot of markets are fighting for certain things. Certainly you go through hard patches here or there. But whenever I get a renewal, I always do the math, meaning that, anybody can do this on their professional. And my advice to you is do the calculation. Take the premium, divide it by the revenue, if that's the applicable, rate mechanism, and then find out how many cents on the dollar you're paying for that policy, and then do it for the previous year and do it on a percent change, and then go back and look at the exposure from this year to last year. And is there any justification for either the rate decrease or the rate increase? So part of the thing that we like to do with our agents is explain the renewal in terms of math. so that the retailer can explain it to their clients. If they've got, 2 million in revenue, um, you know, 1 year and then the next year they have 3.2 and they wonder why they have a premium increase, but then you go ahead and do the numbers and 3.2 million in revenue is actually a 25% rate decrease. It's a conversation that the retailer can have with the insured to say that yes, you do have a little bit of a premium increase, but if you look at your rate, it's actually down because you have more exposure. And then, if you want to market it, absolutely, let's market it, but let's market it with eyes wide open.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. I'm gonna go back to something you said, because you said you feel like it's been soft for 20 and a half years. Why do you think that with professional there is capacity and it doesn't harden like the general liability, auto, umbrella, auto, and property?
In
Because
professional
I have
lines,
my own suspicions, and I want to hear if I'm not going to tell you what they are until you answer.
no, it's okay. You have some capacity in professional lines that aren't exposed in terms of, the GL or the property, and you'll have somebody come in with capacity on professional liability and cyber, but they don't do GL. So if somebody has a major weather event, it's not going to tax them in terms of requiring them to raise rates. In addition to that, with some of the personal lines, with property, with auto, you're starting to see less capacity in certain geographic regions because the likelihood of a carrier being in all kinds of professional lines is much higher than like a carrier that only does like professional lines. Because if you have somebody that does auto, but then also does homeowners, well, if they have an exposure in the South and that exposure exacerbates their combined ratio, then the homeowners part of it will probably affect the auto part of it, even though they're not necessarily related. So it's the combination of, in my mind, you have professional capacity out there that isn't necessarily exposed to weather related events. And I think you just have more of it because if you underwrite correctly, and there's a lot of good underwriters out there, you can maintain a combined ratio that is, I think, a lot more profitable for some companies that are in the personal line side of things.
So that's where I was going with it. I think that there is such a more focused on the supplemental applications and the laser underwriting and all of that, that I think that they actually get the pricing they need more accurately and they select the risk better as a result. When a lot of times, what are we really doing to underwrite auto? Like, are we? We're not. We're putting driver information in and vehicle information in. Yeah, we're looking at historic losses, but what are we doing to predict anything that's happening in the future? What story are those loss runs telling us? What policies and procedures do these companies have in place that are going to help them avoid accidents or at least reduce them to as small of a level as possible? And the reality is, I think that directly reflects on the fact that they have capacity as a result, and pricing has remained relatively soft. What a novel concept. We actually underwrite at a deep level, right? But, you know, I just feel like we need to take some of that and apply it to the other side of things. Producers want to get it done as quick as they can, man. We want to go in, get the deal sold, get the policy bound, get paid, and be on to the next one. And guess what? If we just took an extra little bit of time and had who said you have to ask for that information, right? Is the underwriter. Where's the rule that says, well, I'm only going to give this to Drew if he asks for it? I want you to have everything that I know. You already have your own suspicions, man. You got a bazillion monitors on your desk behind you. I know that you're going to the internet and your primary mission is to find everything you can to keep you from looking like a monkey if you're going to end up being able to go to the market and get me terms, right? So I should be doing the same thing for you, knowing that you're going to double check me, or go look in the areas where you would look for this stuff. But for whatever the reason, we don't take the time to get all of that information. I'd like to think I'm going to get a better result from an underwriter if they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I understand the risk that I have presented them with and that I've accurately done so. I have no problem telling you the hair that's on an account. You already know it's there. The loss runs are going to show you that an account has historically had performance issues, perhaps because most of the time I'm visiting the sick. You got a workers' comp issue, and that's why I'm there. But you're going to know that as the underwriter. If I don't show you that I know that, you've already lost confidence in me before we've ever even gone in the marketplace. So if I can show you, hey, look, here's the deal. They didn't have return to work in place. We've been working with them for 3 months. We were able to get them to put return to work in. Here's the program. Here's the list of return to work jobs that we've put together based on what their current role is. Here's all of these different things. I understand that it's not the best risk based on historic performance, but you also know how our firm operates and the fact that we're in a position to go in and fix these things. So we want to show you every dusty corner. We want to show you the things that are messed up. I want you to see the risk the first time I saw it and then get you pictures or a video of what it looks like after we've been in there for 3 months so you can see that incremental progress. Nobody asks me to do that. I just figured out a long time ago that if I can make my submission as complete as it possibly can be and give the underwriter the entire story, good, bad, or otherwise, in many cases, it's going to be the difference between whether or not I even get a quote. Then once I do get a quote, we can start talking about, is the pricing going to be the best or not? But if all you're doing is taking sales or payrolls by class code or whatever the underwriting data is, slapping it into Accord forms, pencil whipping the yes no questions, and turning it in with loss runs, you're missing the boat. Take the extra time. It doesn't take that long to make a submission complete and demonstrate you might not be an expert, but you're above average in knowing what's going on in that company, and then let the underwriter work with you to get the right terms. I mean, to me, that's what's going to get it done in the hard market. And again, I want to make sure we talk. I hit this home because I said before, I think there's a disconnect. If a producer's doing a dozen reshops, they don't realize that you're doing reshops for however many producers you work with times that 12. But then you're turning around and going to markets that are dealing with multiples of you that are dealing with multiple producers. Yeah, I mean, so it's just we're looking at this thing upside down. We want to be at the top of the food chain, but we're really at the top of the pyramid, and it's the narrowest with us. The number of people are having to deal with gets much wider as you move down that pyramid. So we need to establish a little bit of grace, but is it a realistic thing? And I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, so please, if you need to dodge this, please dodge the question. But
Yeah.
is it a realistic thing for a producer today to send you a submission and say, look, Drew, I've got this thing lined up. Everything you need is in here, but I've got to have my drop dead date for terms is this date. And maybe that date's 3-4 weeks before renewal. Is it still realistic for us to expect to get turnaround there?
I'm going to start by saying insurance works best when it's a partnership.
100%.
I have underwriters who's right off the top of my head, whose numbers I've memorized, who know me personally. And if you want results in this market, if you're just going to throw something at them that's incomplete and you don't call them, you're not going to get results. I mean, in the age of insurtech and AI and automation, there's something to be said for doing things in a hybrid fashion of both old and new school. So when I see a submission that needs some work, the other part of that relationship, the relationship with the retailer, I try to be just as consultative with the retailer as I am with the market in that, hey, the submission has problems. I am more than willing to send it out as is. Here's the problems. What do you want to do about them? These are the markets I would approach, but keep in mind, we can wait for an underwriter to address these problems and they're probably going to come up. Or we can send it out and I'm going to point these things out and see if the underwriter has any more questions. Because at least at a very bare minimum, if you're sending out a submission that you know has deficiencies, at least if you are, transparent with the underwriter and say, hey, I have this submission. These are the deficiencies. Here's my thoughts on the deficiencies. I'm going to go get more information on these deficiencies. Is there anything else you'd like to add? If you're bringing it out that way, at least the underwriter doesn't get it and their shoulders slump down and they're like, well, here's another one. If you're starting out on that aspect of it, I feel like at least you're getting a leg up on things. In terms of the time frame, turnaround time, I mean, it really does vary by market, vary by staffing, vary by, how incomplete is the submission? Like, how many things are we going to need to work out in terms of coverage? It varies. And I think that, honesty is always usually the best policy. When I get a, request for something 3 to 4 weeks out, it's just a realistic assessment of where we are now versus how long it's going to take to where we need to be. And sure, every best effort is going to be made to try to get there, but it's a sort of a teamwork approach, and it's going to be, incumbent on all sides to get there together. And the together part is, I think, if there's anything that people take out of this webinar, it's that insurance is done together. It's done when the retailer and the wholesaler and the underwriter all work collaboratively as partners to achieve a final result that is good for everybody.
The reason I asked the question is because it's the number one complaint that I hear from retail agents is I can't even get quotes in a reasonable amount of time. I'm getting quotes 3 days before renewal. Keeping in mind that's the only side of the story that we hear. And I wanted people to hear your side of that because I think it's really, really important that people realize this is a partnership, man. I mean, yes, we have options. I have a million different wholesale, not a million, but there's plenty of wholesalers to choose to do business with. And I think that producers oftentimes think that because of that, the wholesalers they are working with need to be beholden to whatever it is the producer expects from them, whether it be substandard submissions, quick turnaround times, whatever. When the reality is there's a million different producers the wholesalers can work with too. And they're going to work with the people who give them what they need when they need it. It's no different. I mean, and I talk about this when I speak publicly, but one of the things that drives me nuts is the hypocrisy of the producer because we get upset when an underwriter says, hey, I need target premium. And we don't want to give it to them. Well, what do they need that for? Meanwhile, we're the same people that are irritated when a prospect sends us declarations pages with the premiums blacked out. Like, how can we be upset about that, and then not provide target pricing to an underwriter? Well, the answer is they don't understand why the underwriter needs it. They don't understand that's a very quick disqualifier right out of the box. If you see target premium and beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's no way you're going to get to that. Why would you waste your time or theirs? If you do know you can get to it, then you can take the next step. But the other thing is, I think a lot of times if I'm a producer, and look, guys, I understand I'm being a double agent here right now, but I do really think this way. I think that if we were to sit back and look at our relationship with wholesalers and we ask the same questions of ourselves that we ask our prospects, will you get me the information I need in a timely fashion when I need it? Will you give me access to your people to ask questions if I have follow-up that I need to know? And if I come back to you with a compelling business reason, do you have the ability to fire the incumbent and hire me? All three of those are questions that are pertinent to the producer wholesale relationship, just like they're pertinent to the producer client relationship. Ask yourself that. Are you going to get them the loss runs? Are you going to get them the premium versus loss summary? Are you going to get them the narrative? If you say yes, good, we'll move to the next one. Are you going to be able to answer their questions, or is someone in your operation going to be able to answer the follow-up questions if they need to have questions answered? And most importantly, if Drew comes back to me and says, look, man, I've got a couple of good options, but I've got an absolute smoking quote right here from whichever carrier, I would love to be able to write this with you, and then you ghost him. Like what are we doing? You know, you don't build a partnership that way. The other thing that I think is really, really important is this is not, is the insurance industry cyclical? Yes, the insurance industry is cyclical. Do you need to invest in the industry year round? You absolutely do. And around all cycles. And what I mean by that is right now, I hear a trend of a lot of producers who are focusing solely on their retention and are doing nothing to prospect or go out and write new business because of all the reshops and all of the inbound. And it's very,
Mhm.
very easy to come by leads in today's day and age. They are looking through clouded glasses because number one, you can't control the quality of inbound. That you can't tell me that every inbound lead is your ideal prospect that's calling you. Number
Mhm.
two, we have a false sense of security because we have what's pretty much an across the board 25% organic growth in the agencies that I've talked to, just as a function of rate at this point. And
Mhm.
so we're getting a false sense of security there. There's going to come a time when the market softens again, and we're going to need to go out and write business. And guess what? We're not going to have the pipeline built because we didn't do the groundwork necessary to prepare ourselves for when the market turned. If you're not getting the results you want from your wholesale relationship right now, I would argue you probably didn't make the investments you needed to when you didn't need that wholesaler when the market was soft so that you had the relationship to get things done now that the market's hardened. It can't be, I'm going to have a relationship with you only when I need you. It has to be you're building a relationship that's going to stand the test of time. And it's one of the reasons why in my agency, I literally have three primary wholesalers that we work with, and that's it. And of the three primary, we have our top one or two, and that gets the lion's share of the business. And the one underwriter, somebody, unfortunately, she passed away a year ago this past spring. She wrote the first policy I ever wrote when I got my insurance license. I've been doing business with her for 20 years. She taught me along the way for 20 years things that I needed to know that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I'm obviously going to be loyal to that person because they made that investment in me, just like I would want her to be loyal to me because my bind ratio with her was as high as what it was. But
Yep.
I don't think that we look at the relationship of people. I think we look at each other as being on it's we're all on the same side of the table. So I don't really need to invest in a relationship with you as much as I need to invest in a better relationship with the prospects. If you don't have good relationships with your carriers, your underwriters, your wholesalers, you might as well forget it because you need them in order to handle the needs of the clients and prospects. If you don't have those relationships, you don't have a business.
100%. And I think, you know, developing good relationships is a little bit, you have to be tenacious, whether you're an agent or you're a wholesaler at developing new relationships and not be complacent with what you have. I mean, myself, I make one or two cold calls a day to an agent, and I try not to be pushy or salesy, and simply just say, "Look, you may have somebody you work with right now, which is great, but here's my stuff. If you ever find yourself in a pickle, I answer my phone, and I'll try to do a good job for you, and just leave it at that. And if you do one or two of those a day, whether you're an agent or whether you're a wholesaler, well, now you're talking about roughly 250 working days a year times two, that's 500. If your turnover rate is 20%, now you have something. And it's a matter of not being complacent with what you have and always trying to, put yourself in a position to be in the right place at the right time with the right person that needs the services that you have to offer and then deliver. So, part of our process at AJ Wayne is that we just try to put ourselves to be in a position to deliver good services when that right place, right time happens. And then, when we get the opportunity, deliver. So, I would be remiss to say that I am very thankful for all of the retailers that do work with us. They're all great people, and we're very lucky to have them. And that anybody that gives us a shot, that we would do our best to deliver on the promises of a partnership, and and make that investment in them to start a new relationship whenever the opportunity arises.
That is perfect segue. So as we wrap up, how do they get a hold of you, man? If they're interested in working with you moving forward, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
We've got a website, www.ajwayne.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn. You can always give me a call at 773-559-1883. I answer my phone. I return all my messages within 24 hours. Again, if you give us a shot at your business, we'll do our best to be timely with a response, and we'll do our best to give you good information to help you succeed and buy more business.
Guys, listen, this is the first time that Drew and I have ever met, other than interacting back and forth a few times on LinkedIn. What I will tell you is he does what he says he's going to do. The reason he's on the podcast is because he reached out to me cold and solicited me to come and give him submissions because we interacted on LinkedIn. And I have a lot of respect for that. I have, number one, I have respect for the fact that he actually cold called, because if we're in that role every day, we understand what that takes. But I also respect the fact that, like me, sometimes it's okay to be the on deck hitter, right? Like, I'm in a position right now. I'm not saying it's going to be today or tomorrow, but I can tell you at some point down the road, Drew is going to start getting submissions from Florida Risk Partners. And the reason why is because he was respectful in the way that he reached out to me. He was respectful in the objection that I gave him, which honestly, that's probably the second time you heard the story about Trina being the first underwriter that I ever worked with, because I probably told you that when you reached out to me originally. I don't remember, but I have a lot of appreciation for that. So everything I heard him say in some way, shape, or form, I've seen almost all of that come to fruition just in following him online, in the little bit of interaction that I've had with him. So my challenge to you would be, if you're having a hard time with professional liability, or if you're somebody who's newer in the industry, I don't want to stack him up with all brand new agents, but if you're looking for that lifeline or that resource or somebody who has the ability to educate you, this is probably somebody that you want to be connected with and reach out to, because I think that it'll pay dividends for you as you go to grow your book of business. So as we wrap up, Drew, thank you so much for being on today, man. I really, really appreciate it. We went for about an hour. I think it was great conversation. And I look forward to hearing about some success stories from some of you who've decided that Drew's your guy and he's able to help you get some things done. So look forward to hearing those too. Thanks again for coming on. We'll catch you guys next time. See ya.